That's from when we first meet you as participants in our learning journey. We're here to help students learn to read and love to read and to see themselves as readers. We're here to help kids learn to write and love to write and to see themselves as communicators. And it's our primary purpose in, I think, in the primary years, and of course, some math thrown in to boot, and all of the social aspects. But our literacy piece is about readers and writers and speakers and thinkers who want to participate and who grow and grow and grow through their participation. So when we think about that, and those of you who know me and those I've been lucky enough to work with over the years will know that I keep coming back and saying we have to have a mental model of what counts when we're thinking about literacy or anything else that we do, or we can't keep moving forward with those with whom we work. In a way that is really maximizing our time with our learners. It's really thinking about what am I doing and how am I doing it, and what kind of impact is it having on my kids, and how does that responsive teaching look? So right now, we're in a time which I think everybody in the English-speaking world is recognizing, where there's hot positions being taken about what counts in primary literacy. And I fervently hope that we actually think about what are we looking for with our learners and try and avoid camps and labels. We've worked hard in our province to focus on inclusion and valuing all voices, and building that together is better, and the collective is stronger than the individual, and to think about what it is that we do that makes a difference. And that's what I want us to think about today. What is it that we do that makes a difference? What is it that kids need to make a difference in their lives as readers and writers? Not what is a label, what is the set standard that's going through, who comes into our rooms, who comes to work with us, and how do we grow them on this journey? No matter how you view literacy, and you look at reading, which is one of the things that we have lots and lots of opinions on these days, there are two main facets in what we're doing in helping learn to read and helping to become a reader. And one big chunk falls under what I think of as word recognition, and the other big chunk falls under what I think of as creating meaning. We want kids who recognize words, who learn to recognize words, who grow their vocabularies, who can do this with eyes on text, who use this to help create meaning. We don't read just to sound good. We don't read just to check our fluency. And we don't read just from pictures. We need both words and we need meaning. And so these next three slides that I'm just going to quickly make reference to as we go through, because you'll be able to come back and look at them again at your discretion if you want. This first slide is what I think of as a model for approaching beginning reading that I worked on with three brilliant educators in Coquitlam, Erin Reed and Deb Vanderwood, and we were working with primary teachers in Coquitlam and said, you know, we really need to have a model, and I'm thinking of it as a placemat and a one-pager that I can look at as a teacher and think, where am I working on this with my kids? Where do they need support? Where can they work more independently? What do I need to explicitly teach? And how can I do this in a way that's manageable? And so this was the front piece of our one-page placemat. This was our second piece. So you could flip it over, and on the back, you could say, what's word recognition and how do we break that down a bit? And what's creating meaning and how do we break that down a bit? And the part I want you to notice in here is that under word recognition, we have some goals, and under meaning, we have some goals. Goals are important in everything we do. So we can answer that question, why are we doing this at this time for these kids? So when we think about word recognition goals, we teach word recognition, we teach skills in how to find out what this word says in order to get kids to a greater degree of automaticity so that they're growing their number of sight words. Okay? We teach word recognition so that we can help students become more fluent, because fluency can support comprehension. We teach word recognition because we know that when you understand words, you can more easily focus on thinking and understanding text. So we don't teach any word recognition skills just by and of themselves. We don't worry about whether you know 6 today and 8 tomorrow, and that this is progress. We worry about whether or not you're gaining more fluency with automaticity with your words, and how many different ways we can use to approach this separately and embedded as appropriate for the individual child. We think about why we're focusing on meaning, because when we read for understanding. We also read for joy, and we also read to expand our world. And those are the reasons that we come back to reading again and again. And I think that's why it's so hotly debated, because it's important. We get incredible information from text, all kinds of text. We get incredible joy from text, and we get incredible understanding. The other piece that I think is just so important that we keep remembering as we go forward is that we have a group of educators in our province that I am immensely proud of. We have worked hard to build teacher capacity for decades in the province of BC. And one of the things that I think is important to remember as a teacher in BC is that we have an incredible amount of autonomy. We don't receive dictates about what it is we must do. We're not used to having orders come that say, you must do this at this time with this group. And that's because we believe and we trust in teachers' abilities to make sound professional judgment. And we believe in that collective ability that we have, that I may not know enough to teach each of my children all of the time, but I do know enough to ask questions. And I know people that I can ask questions to, and I know that together we can come to figure out some of those most challenging kids that we have. We know that our professional judgment, our ability to respond to kids, is always more important than a scripted program written by people who've never seen our particular kids. We know that there's no one right answer for every child in anybody's class in this province. We know that what we need to know is what would a reasonable sequence of skill development look like, and that's what we've tried to do in these pillars. And then as teachers, we trust our sound professional judgment to look at that sequence as a guide and make it match for the child and the children in front of us. We always are responding to those kids. Now, this is our starting point. And one of the things that I think is pretty cool about what happens in BC is that we present ideas and others take those ideas and say, how can we make this work for us? So Briana's here today, and she and Carrie and a group of educators in Richmond looked at the model and said, how can we take this and have it be more than just reading, but have it be reading and writing and oral language? And how can we focus this on what we're going to call pillars of literacy and look at it with a K-2 lens on it? And so it's grown from that same conversation and that same work. And notice this piece that we have here. Everything looks, the same titles for each of the pillars, but there's a mix of what's happening at what time. And one of the pieces that's not the right phrase, what's happening, there's no fixed order here. So we originally grouped words and understanding. They've mixed them together. And if you were reading it as we often do, right, from left to right, they're starting with comprehension. Okay, so what does comprehension look like in reading and writing and speaking and listening? And how do all these other pieces come together and support the learning that we're doing with our children as we move forward? And they have happily shared this with all of us. And so again, it's that piece that helps me think, what would be a reasonable sequence? Because I need to have a plan in my mind. If I don't, I'm just going to be doing random pieces of what will I do today? So this helps me with my planning and my sequencing. The other big piece that we think about in here is, what do I do as a teacher? Again, I'm not just hanging out in the classroom thinking about, oh, I found a book, I think I'll teach something with it today. I wonder what that will be, and hope for divine intervention. We have planned actions that we do with our kids, and we think about when we teach and how we're working to have kids become independent, increasingly independent readers and writers. So this model was adopted and adapted by me from work that Fountas and Pinnell had done. And I shifted it around a little bit because I wanted it to fit our context and some of our beliefs a little more. Notice that this is again looking at reading, but it's all growing out of oral language. Right? It doesn't start cold. Reading grows from talk. Okay? And we start with who's holding the control and who has less control. So we think about this as, what does this look like in the course of a day in my classroom? Okay? I need to have interactive read alouds where I'm modeling my thinking. I'm building motivation for the text. I'm inviting kids in to make meaning with me. And that starts with high teacher control and low student control. And all of that modeling and explicit teaching that I'm doing is based on what I believe my kids need to know. And I'm collecting that evidence and what they need to know based on my observations, my conversations with them, and products of work that I see them doing. Now I'm moving to let go of that control and let them practice more and more on their own and work with the strategies that I'm teaching to get them to low teacher support and high student control. And that's when they're working on independent reading. So that's my goal, is to move and change those arrows so that I'm releasing my control and they're gaining control. Now, notice how that goes from not just me reading out loud in an interactive way to kids reading on their own, but with steps along the way. And so when I'm planning, these pieces come in. My shared reading is happening with whole group shared reading and smaller group shared reading. It's happening with the morning message when I'm putting it up first thing in the morning as the kids are coming in. It's balancing equal amounts of control when I'm working with small groups of readers, whether they're in lit circles or guided reading with leveled books, or I would say in that same piece is when I'm working in small skill groups, but it is at that time a cross of control, right? I need to be working side by side with those kids in those small groups where I can see that they're actually using the skills and strategies that I've been teaching them as they go. I think about my planning, and I'm thinking about when I'm planning, when do I have whole group literacy work in my classroom? When do I have small group, whether it's skill or guided reading based? What do my conferences look like? Those individual reading and writing conferences, quick flyby conferences where I'm focusing on something the child's doing well and I'm extending the thinking every day with every child. And when every day do they have a chance to do some choice reading? I want all of those organizational structures in my classroom each day. So I'm thinking about that in my planning because that's making a difference of how I'm using gradual release, the explicitness of my teaching, and reaching and teaching each child as we go through. So always the same thing. Who are my kids? I need to know them. What's my target? What am I trying to teach? And so this is the piece that I want us to keep coming back and thinking about. Again, it's just, I have a plan as a teacher. I have curriculum goals. I have targets. They may come from my model of where I'm working toward, and I may be pulling them from these pillars. Some are coming from my curriculum guide. I'm thinking about those kids in front of me, and I'm thinking, who are they? What are their strengths and what are their stretches? And then I'm making a plan, and I'm using that plan to guide my actions as I go. So here's a very quick example of what that can look like. So Leyton and I have talked for many years, and prior to that, Susan Close and I talked about strategies and strategies with purpose, strategies whose purpose is to focus on building connections with each other, with the book, strategies whose purpose is to process new information, strategies whose purpose is to transform and personalize. And so I keep that as a framework in my head when I'm designing a lesson. I'm also thinking in this lesson planning piece about what are my big ideas? What are my key concepts? What kind of competencies or strategies do I want to develop with my kids? So that's my left-hand side of the page. Here's my right-hand side, and I've just written out my thinking so that you can sort of see, track that through when I'm talking about why we have to keep our eye on the ball as we're moving forward with literacy. So I have a book that I want to read with this group of grades 1s and 2s. And the big idea in here is that I want to be focusing on not finding nonfiction detail in a fiction story. Okay? I need to keep that in mind, because if I don't, I can lose track of it while I'm getting excited about reading the book, or I can be distracted by something that the kids do as we're interacting with the book, and I can lose my focus, right? So it's not just a blind, let's just read this book and see what happens. I have a targeted skill. Now, as well in this book, because I can choose different focus areas, we have two main animals, bats and moose. And it's kind of a moralistic little story. And we learn that, somebody small can help somebody big. And we learn that it's important to pay attention to your mother when she tells you to do something and you sneak out and you do something differently. That's not a good idea. But those are sub purposes. Those are sub big ideas, because I want to keep coming back to this nonfiction detail. So I introduce that in my connecting. What do you know about bats? And I introduce some vocabulary that I want them to learn, that I want us to talk about before we approach it in the text. We talk about nocturnal, colony, and roost. And we have conversation around that. And because I'm always wanting to infuse into any lesson a focus on how we figure out these words, we talk about the fact that nocturnal has 3 syllables in it. And oh my gosh, doesn't colony 2? And even though they've got different numbers of letters, not because all of my kids are ready to do this yet, but because some of them are, and I want them all involved in this conversation, and it's inserted into this whole group lesson. We do a little brainstorming around roost and the oo sound that in this case is made with those 2 O's, and what are some other words that have that sound and what would that look like? And then we move on. And as we go through, we read and discuss what are we finding out about bats, and we do some predicting. We have a little bird walk in here because turns out that the moose is trapped, and one of the things he's worried about are hunters. And one of the kids says to me, "What's a hunter?" And it turns out that nobody in the class knows what a hunter is. It's an urban class in Richmond. So that's kind of a little diversion. It's why it's important to be responsive, because I can still be focusing on information about bats and information about moose. But if you have no idea what a hunter is, it doesn't matter that my most important words here were nocturnal, colony, and roost. You have to understand hunter. So I have to stop, deal with that, and keep going. And then as I'm talking about hunting licenses, one of the kids says, "But no, we don't have to have a license." Then we have a little sidebar that also talks about First Peoples, and that makes a difference too. And so you don't have the same license. And then we come around to the end, and what is it that they have to do? Now here's their ending piece. Okay? And so it's that piece I want you to think about when we're looking at whole class strategies, and not forget to be doing these. I want to be working with these strategies a couple of times a week, maybe 3. I want to make sure there's an access point for every one of those kids sitting there. I want to use this text with a goal, and I want to have lots and lots of oral language in it. Here's what the kids had to do. We were reading, the book was Bailey the Bat by Grant Lawrence. And so remember, we have a focus on what are we learning about bats? So I put down bats at the end and say, so let's just think about it, because we've talked about the story and what fun it was and all the things we've learned. What do we know about bats? Now it's getting close. This is last spring. It's getting close to recess. It's time to wash our hands and get outside. And so we're always trying to maximize our time. So what we're doing is, in order to get over to wash your hands, you tell me something that you know about bats. Tell me where to put it on this web. So they're doing the thinking and the organizing, and I'm just doing the linking. And when you put your idea up there, you can run over, you can wash your hands. And if you like it, you can go back to the carpet and see if you want to add another idea, but everybody gets a chance to add in one idea. So you can picture what the kids are doing. They're sitting on the carpet, they're contributing. Some of them don't want to leave because they want to watch the web grow and think about where the organization should go. Some wash their hands and then they come whipping back to sit down on the carpet, hopefully without touching their hands to the carpet on their way down, or we've defeated the purpose. And all of the thinking is showing up. They're coming up, they're touching things on the board, and they're looking and saying, look at the eating insects. And that's connected to fangs, and this is why it's connected. They're talking, they're showing. It's visible literacy with the thinking out there in front of them. They don't have to do an individual right. They don't have to do anything else with it this time. We're leaving it up. We're going to talk about some of the connections and the things that we've learned, and on we move. So we think about how we have our model, who we have as kids, what our targets are, how we're using their strengths and their stretches, and we're moving forward. And that's where our literacy planning comes. So here's your first break. Okay? We have 2 questions for you. One is, how does this way of thinking about literacy, this pedagogy, connect to your thinking and your practice? And in that first 22 minutes or so, what are some ideas that have nudged you? And you're thinking about, what would this look like in my practice? How does this connect to some of the beliefs that I have? Leyton, are you setting a timer? Or do you want me to set a timer?
Thank you, Faye. I will set a timer. So folks, what we do in this series is we just have some cross-province conversations. So we're going to head into breakout rooms, going to have about 5 minutes in breakout rooms just to talk about what Faye has shared in our opening. So how does this pedagogical approach connect to your thinking and your practice? And how does this nudge your thinking where you might need to focus, or what's powerful, or what resonates with you? So have a great 5-minute chat. If you're already with a group somewhere, you could not accept the breakout room and have your conversation in your space. I see there's lots of groups of folks here today, but we invite you to come in and join and collaborate and share, and I'll see you back in 5 minutes.
Meeting is being recorded.
Thanks, everyone. This meeting is being recorded, in case you didn't know. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a great little cross-provincial conversation. Room 2 was the most popular room, and room 15, people were like, nah, I'm talking to my cats. Welcome back, and I'm going to pass the torch back to Faye. I believe is starting again. Are you starting again, Faye? And
Charmaine's going to go right.
I'll have a turn.
All right, so Charmaine, I'll let you share your own screen there.
Thank you so much. Great. Everyone can see that okay? Beautiful. Thank you so much. Wow, I'm so excited. This is just a brilliant, thank you, Leyton. What an opportunity. I would be so grateful to sit in a session with any one of these brilliant educators. So we need to make more of these. So thank you. Before I begin, I would like to recognize and acknowledge the land of the Lekwungen speaking people, Yiswamal and Songhees Nation. And just beautiful memory here. My class and I taking a hike. We were accompanied by an elder, learned the Lekwungen name for Camas, the Quetlal. And I think in working alongside, you really do start to feel a much stronger sense of place and stewardship. And just sharing that with the littles is pretty special. So I am here with you today with deep gratitude. And my hope this afternoon is, to reiterate much of what Faye's already said. And really, when we do seem redundant, it just emphasizes the importance of certain things. So really, my hope is to just invite curiosity and share some insight around our learning and our literacy learning environments. And I think today is about checking in and sharing. So when it comes to literacy environments, I always ask myself a few questions. What is the feeling in this room? Check in with yourself every once in a while. Anticipation, panic, joy. What's the feeling? Are there provocations inviting wonder and learning? Are there labels around so students can constantly connect that written language with the things that they represent? I think having children's names, spotting their names in multiple places, what a beautiful sense of I belong here. And their photos, come on, how wonderful is that? Mirrors even. Can they see themselves in the learning space? Really, the environment just has such a huge influence on the attitude and the behaviors and the engagement, right, towards learning. So I just invite you to explore that with me. And the BC curriculum, the early learning framework, the First People's Principles of Learning, those are our guiding documents in primary, right? And the early learning framework anchors the learning pathways with a principle that says children are strong, capable in their uniqueness, and full of potential. So when our practice reflects that, really truly reflects us, that's when children belong. That's when they feel belonging. And when we talk about uniqueness, that's really about making those little necessary shifts away from systems of sameness, right? And that one size fits all, and really holding space, as Faye mentioned, for students to bring their full identity, their entirety to school and into our spaces, and just wrapping all the love around them. We're really, really striving towards every child feeling seen, authentically seen and heard and valued, and for children to feel relevance and meaning in their learning, right? So I think when we consider the gaps in literacy achievement, maybe with our Indigenous students or our children in care, new Canadians, this is not because the children aren't capable. These gaps are often because we haven't set up our conditions for success, sort of that responsive instructional approach that Faye so beautifully describes, and then the environment that embraces the whole child. So let's just dig into that a little more. Particularly these principles highlighted, you know, it's important to check in and ask ourselves, do these principles hold true in my space, in our classroom? So what are our students telling us? We talk about being responsive. What does that look and feel like? This definitely is the time of year when we're getting a little weary. I've been in schools all day. I feel it, that the little sparkle, there's a little sparkle, tiny sparkle wearing off. The days are a little darker, wetter. Those beautiful crayons that we bought at the beginning of the year have been a little bit broken, missing, eaten, whatever. It's not quite as exciting and fresh as we started. So what seemed a little challenging at the start of the year may seem even more challenging now. But that discomfort is a welcome opportunity to check in with ourselves and our learning environments and our spaces, because we come to this work with such humility, right, and openness. This is such a joyful job, and we need that learning environment just as much as our littles do, that nurturing classroom community. So I think there are more complexities than ever in our classrooms post-COVID. We hear about that. All of us, including children, you know, we experienced a disruption in our social interactions. So we see some gaps in speech development, social skills, self-regulation, but no one is at fault, right? The children can't be penalized with the push to catch up. They are where they are. So we're not going to be pushing them or squeezing them along to where we wish they were. So we really listen to them. What are they telling us? Maybe I just don't understand. This doesn't feel relevant to me. I don't know what you mean when you say listen or settle down. What are they telling us? I think we also listen to our data when we want to be responsive. In our district, we are really doing a deep dive check-in. We're taking our data and our lack of data really, and recognizing our holes and our blind spots. And we're calling out our accountability, sort of asking ourselves, in what ways are we addressing the inequities of outcomes for diverse learners in literacy? And in what ways are we addressing the inequity of outcomes for Indigenous learners in literacy? These questions can really shape our environment. And so for us in District 61, to help us consider how we can address the inequities, to best serve sort of all learners, not just this little group in the middle. We drafted sort of a model, a framework, and specifically a model to reflect a culturally responsive and inclusive approach to literacy learning. And so to bring an aspirational graphic like this to life, sometimes we have to change the environment or sort of take comfortable practices and reconsider them or revise them. And I think this entails deep relationship and recognizing and valuing every student as they walk through the door, all of their strengths and capacities attributed to their cultural background, their prior experiences, taking them where they are, moving forward. There are no bulging bits in this graphic. It's very round and fluid. And that's because each of these components are interactive and each component contributes to the end goal, right? The end goal, as Faye mentioned, just for all of our children to become readers and writers and thinkers and communicators and love school through engagement and feel connected to school. So how do we bring this to life? This is why I have you here with me. We can figure this out together. We think of our literacy environment and what does it look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? I think what it looks like to start with, and Faye already mentioned, no plan, no point. It looks like setting the table and co-creating conditions for learning. That's paramount for the success of our students. When we determine boundaries and we discuss the goals as a classroom community, as individuals, we're setting the foundation for each child to know that they matter and that together we're going to find a pathway for everyone, right? Even little Bert over under the rug and, little one out in the hall with EA, bring them on in. There's a pathway for everyone. We sit in circle and we work it out together as a community. And for children to really reach their potential and feel regulated, they need the tools and strategies to do that. So this circle is where we do important work, right? Setting clear expectations, sharing and modeling strategies. This is the front loading. And without it, we kind of experience chaos. So in this circle, students are reviewing the expectations together. They're setting a clear purpose. And they're being reminded where they could go for help when maybe you're working with a small group. So again, if we don't do this, we get more of this. And so if we really want responsive and inclusive spaces, what does that look like? I think these pictures, once the table is set, we can launch into our literacy groups with confidence and with comfort and with safety. Because in classrooms where we're responsive, children, sometimes we instruct whole groups, small groups, individuals, but we're always setting high expectations for each learner. And we're equipping them with the strategies to help them reach that potential. I'm thinking about this picture, all the littles around the room. These students are set up for success because they have the capacity to work on their little active center independently. They have something in their bin that's connected to a small group activity that they've already done with their teacher. It's been modeled, and they delight in being helpers and keeping everyone accountable to what the expectation is. I think they know the routine, they know the structure. They know that they too will have a small group time with the teacher because that's part of their community. And so each of these individual centers is reinforcing or reviewing a skill that's already previously taught as a whole group. I think the most wonderful thing about differentiation too is just how that respect grows and how each child is calling out for the others, and they all just want to do their best, and they know the pathway to help themselves and to help others. I think also just I wanted to mention, going back to that small group, this is an opportunity for the relationship building as well. And I can see the teacher just engaging with the littles in their phonics lesson, figuring out exactly where they're at, mastering those skills, and then motivating them for the next step. We lose that engagement if we're stretching too far, or we might lose that engagement if we are trying the one size fits all. It's through that relationship and assessment that we know where to go next. Story making, of course, such a beautiful, inclusive approach to inspiring talk and oral language and generating meaning and drafting for writing, right? So when we incorporate story making, into our literacy practices, really we're embodying the whole child. We're welcoming them, their whole selves in, and opportunity to share who they are and their identity. We're providing them with their voice, and we're providing them with choice, and to be active, right? Everybody wants to be active. So, but again, prior to story making, the conditions are so important. We always want to share the purpose and the why. When we miss that piece, it's really just free play, and which has its own value. And I think that's another session. But when we're using story making as a literacy approach, children are guided by our prompts and our questions. And maybe it's maybe retelling is the purpose. Then if that's the purpose, they need to know that that's the purpose. And what is the setting? Who are the characters? What happened? And we're moving around constantly, listening and assessing that comprehension piece, always moving around. That's why we all have 4 billion steps at the end of the day. So we're moving around and listening and thinking and listening for that retelling, because that was the purpose, right? And that's how the children feel heard. And that is where the relationship is born. What does it look like? It looks like kids thinking and communicating. And we know oral language is so foundational. So we have to offer boundless opportunities for talk. And then we can record the student voice and share that with our families. And do they ever delight in hearing what their child said during the day? So much more meaningful than, a stapled bunch of worksheets. What does it sound like? If we were bringing this model to life, this beautiful interactive model, what would it sound like? It sounds like kids, right? It sounds like sharing and blossoming vocabulary. Their conditions are clearly established. That respect is constantly modeled. So there's a safety there and an invitation, and they just love the opportunity to be the teachers. What does it sound like? What does a teacher sound like in these spaces? I think, oh gosh, we are the question askers, right? We are the strength-based question askers. We notice what they can do, and then we inspire what they could do next. I think so often as educators, we're just reactive because, there's something blowing up in the corner. It's so easy to be reactive, much harder to be proactive and sort of manage rather than support. So how can we reframe our directions all day long into questions? Because that's really embedding the thinking part of our literacy model. How can we maximize that opportunity to empower them to think for themselves rather than to be told? We want them to all be their little thinkers. And gosh, what does it feel like? Nurturing that sense of well-being and belonging is fostered through attuned relationships. That's it, right? When we value each child as strong and capable and full of uniqueness, that's what it feels like. You can't fake it, right? So telling the children they belong or making a pretty display about it, those are nice things, but actual belonging is a feeling, and it has to be fostered. It's truly the most challenging part and the most rewarding part, I think, of everything we do. And it has everything to do with addressing inequities in literacy learning. And nothing can build student and teacher relationships except the student and the teacher, right? It's the work we do people to people. So something as simple as moving down the outside lineup and greeting each child by name and sharing the smile and a few words or a compliment. Not only are they starting their day with a warm connection and your delight in seeing them, but you are modeling in context, rich vocabulary, right? Descriptive vocabulary. Henry, your smile is like a gleaming sunshine. And that's it. Taking the time to greet each child every day. Such a small effort, huge impact. So what does it feel like? It feels like belonging and it feels like mattering. I think I'm probably over time. So thank you so much. And if you do have any questions, please reach out. I love to chat about all of these things. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Charmaine. If you take your screen share off, then Harp could put hers on. And we're going to do a little piece from there, and then we'll go into the breakout.
I'm going to see if I can figure this out with ease.
The bottom of your screen, there should be one that's lit up that's green. It says screen share.
See that. Sorry,
Okay.
you guys, I had an update earlier and it's making this a little challenging for me.
If it doesn't work, I can share the screen from here.
I think you might need to share my slides, Faye.
Okay. Okay. We come back. And
Perfect. So before we begin, I'm Harpreet. I'm the early learning coordinator in the Coquitlam School District. I'm so excited to be here, and I deeply apologize for my lack of technology skills right now. I'm currently on maternity leave. I have a 9-month-old who requires a lot of my brain power, so me figuring out how to share my screen apparently is something that has dropped off my capabilities as of right now. And before we get started, I do want to acknowledge that I'm on the unceded traditional territory of the Coquitlam First Nation, which lies within the shared territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, Katzie, Musqueam, Kaikite, Squamish, and Stolo nations. As I look outside today and brace myself for the dark, dreary, cold weather, I am reminded about my role as a steward on this land, as well as I'm comforted in knowing that Mother Nature is taking care of us and taking time for restoring, regrowing, especially in light of all of these forest fires that were actually very close to my home this time around. So I am feeling very grateful that the rain is here, despite how dark and cold I am feeling. So we're going to get started on an example, and I wanted to just touch on a word recognition example, because as Faye mentioned, when we have these two models, we're constantly negotiating between word recognition and creating meaning, and how they interact together and how they play off of each other, and our role in the curriculum with our learning standards around skill building as well as competency development. So how are we creating these rich, authentic examples for kids to really deeply engage in topics and ideas with the heart of what matters, in a way to grow as individuals, as well as to grow as literate citizens of this place. So when thinking about perhaps a read aloud or a lesson, we always want to have a rich mentor text. I know for me, having taught from K to 2 for many, many years, having that rich mentor text really was the spark of my classroom, or that provocation that would really ignite some deep learning. So thinking about purposeful text selection, we want to really curate titles that find stories that promote deep engagement and provide access for all learners. And we want to look for titles that are rich in story and rich in illustrations, stories that are relevant to students and that show people and communities, that leave room for discussion or exploration. And ultimately, we want stories that authentically represent individuals as whole beings. By sharing these stories, such as these in our classrooms, the hope's really to provide the opportunity for windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors, windows which readers can see other ways of being in this world, and the sliding glass door in which the reader can visit a new way of being in this world, or see a text as a mirror of a reflection of the ways of their own beings. In our district, we have worked long and hard of curating a sample text list of a number of titles, and as Charmaine mentioned, aligning with some of those anchor documents with the early learning framework, really digging into identity and social responsibility or social justice or diversity. We spent a lot of time really trying to find bundles or text sets where students could engage in multiple texts on a particular topic in order to help their understanding of that topic expand, and use that knowledge to develop the reading from the first text to help them dive in deeper into a second or a third. What's more is that readers begin to think critically about what's being shared in each of those texts because they've read multiple texts. So that being said, we did choose particular ones around identity, and Faye, I'll just get you to go back. This was just, no worries. This is just a sample of something that I would choose for the beginning of the year. It's a really natural focus to get into identity, getting to know ourselves as we get to know each other and build our community. And always keeping in mind that our goal of teaching reading is to create kids who can read, but more importantly, to create kids who choose to read and write. It's important to be thoughtful in the books that we want to be putting in front of them to promote that deep engagement. The titles here on the slide are just a few of what we'd shared and what you might bundle together in the development of a lesson sequence, exploring identity to expand student understanding. One title that we're going to dig in a little bit deeper today is Your Name is a Song. And I know that this is a very familiar text to many of you, I'm sure, but quickly for those of you who may not have read this book, it's about a little girl's frustration about a teacher and peers who are mispronouncing her name, resulting her not wanting to return back to school. As a response to her frustration, her mother takes her on this lyrical walk and really shares the musicality of African, Asian, Black American, Latinx, and Middle Eastern names, which leaves the little girl feeling empowered to share her knowledge and with others as she returns to school the next day. So why I thought this book would be relevant, why I would choose this book to share with my kids in my class, is because at the beginning of the school year, it's such a natural focus to get to know each other's names. Particularly in early primary, names are such an accessible idea and one that invites connection, and it's often a springboard for a lot of literacy learning. And as we know, children often recognize their own names quickly when growing as readers, and it opens up many opportunities, pathways to support emergent spelling, letter identification, writing. Often students and children are comfortable with writing the letters in their own names. It can build into syllable work. And choosing this text, I also have potential areas for identity exploration. So thinking beyond just necessarily skill building, I also want to think about what are some of the competencies that I want to try to engage in. I might want to dive into name stories or naming traditions or feelings about our names and family connections, illustrating your names, weaving in the arts. This is such a beautiful lyrical text. So exploring the musicality of one's name by creating songs. So starting with this as a read aloud opens the discussion as to where some of those explorations might lead, and stopping and pausing to listen to our students will help guide some of that direction as we respond to their directions throughout our explorations. I'm just going to share with you a few pages as if I were to lead the read aloud in my class. Please don't stomp unless we're stepping in a drill team, Mama said. Was your first day of school so bad? The girl looked down. No one could say my name. Yes, girl, names are songs. Sing your name. Your teacher will learn to sing it too. The girl did a jig as they walked on. During our read aloud, I might strategically stop on this page, and there's a particular reason I might do it. There's an opportunity that this page presents where I would invite my kids to engage in the tapping as we read along in this book. I might reread the page a few times to model for the children as they pick up on the rhythms. If I notice them getting the hang of it, I might invite them or encourage them to try with their own names and their peers' names. And the purpose of here is just really to make it in a playful experience. As we know, children really thrive in playful experiences. Play-based learning is something that we deeply value in early primary, and we want to be building that into our day-to-day. And while they're engaged, I'm taking time to listen into the rhythms. I'm quietly observing, and I'm not really bringing attention to the syllable work that they're actually engaging in. And so after a few minutes, I continue on with the read aloud and return our attention to the ideas of identity and discussing the character's feelings and connections. And the pause at this particular page really serves as that playful experience, and it's within the read aloud and not the main attraction. So I'm not bringing a lot of attention to it. I'm just letting the kids explore and engage. Why teaching syllables matter? As I'm sure many of you guessed, that particular page really sets it up for that work around syllables. Teaching syllables is something that we're all familiar with. Many kids come through our doors that have been familiar with syllables long before they entered our classrooms. And then there's students that haven't had that same exposure and may need some more explicit instruction around it. It's really important that we're taking the time to notice these skills in our children, to really identify that diversity within our classroom, to really understand that one size doesn't fit all, and that we do need to sort of negotiate where our time is going to be spent, whether it's whole group, small group, individual work. Syllables or hearing sounds, sorry, I'm going to get you to go back. Yes, syllables or hearing sounds in a sequence and blending them back together to make words is a precursor to reading and writing, and can lead into reading and spelling more efficiently and effectively, as we know. And particularly for our emergent readers, we really want to keep this focus on the oral language and playing with the syllables, feeling the beats while they're saying the words to introduce the concept of the spoken words that can be divided into smaller units. And dividing the words into parts or chunks really helps the process of decoding. And when children are faced with like a really long word, it offers them an opportunity to break it up into bits to kind of overcome that sort of long word fatigue as they're reading. And understanding syllables also can help students to learn to spell words correctly, and knowing the rules for syllables or syllable division can help students read words more accurately and more fluently. By exaggerating the pronunciation of words and syllables, it's easier to remember how they are spelled. So, for example, Wednesday versus Wednesday, or February versus February, or library versus library. So all of these things that we are taking into consideration about why these teaching syllables matter. So, for example, how I would then build it and extend it into our work. We have routines set up in the day, and Charmaine went over a few of them, and ways to build connection. We often start our days with a morning meeting or an opening circle, and I might pull in a name song. And, a name song is something that's incredibly familiar to us, and connecting it back to the text that we read the day before. I would integrate a name game to help build that community, to help build connection, and as mentioned earlier, build in some of that explicit literacy instruction. Say your names, likely familiar to you, or a version of it. There's endless possibilities. And this is just an example of a greeting that can easily be integrated and varied to feel new over time. So depending on what you observed the day before, you might start off simply with using different voices, or inviting students to use a soft voice or a deep voice or a spooky voice, which the whole class would then echo. And then this can lead to students saying their names by hand clapping, or clapping their thigh or foot, tapping their feet to the rhythms of their name. And unofficially, depending on how you've really introduced this concept of syllables. And you might encourage them to add other movements, whether it's hand gestures, however you've introduced it, up the arm, or hand on your chin to feel the drop of the jaw, which the class would then mimic when they repeat their name. These experiences can also serve as an informal assessment. I might learn that some students might need some more targeted instruction around this. It might shape my literacy centers that I put out, or small group instruction, or other games I might infuse into my morning meetings. It doesn't have to be something I spend a lot of time on, depending where the kids are at. And again, this is a quick routine to get our day going in the morning, and is connected to our explorations and identity. So obviously, both are still woven together. Depending on different routines that you include in your practice, you might also weave it into your morning meeting, your morning message, as a way to open up a discussion around syllables in another way. So, for example, this one would say, "I'm excited to hear your name stories today. Our class helper is Jamila. Can you count the syllables, chunks, beats? And this depends on if you have formally introduced the concept in her name. So how many syllables do you have in your name? This message can lead into discussing Jamila's name orally. We can then open up to the class to really understand, like see what it is that they understand already, like a sort of like a pre-assessment. Or I can choose to model it, how I break the name up. Likely not all my kids are reading. That's not an expectation I have, but it might be an extension for some that are ready for it. I really want to focus on that phonological piece here and build that oral language aspect for now. And in my message, again, with the kids in mind, I also might add a challenge at the end, if you notice here, where it says, where I might provoke kids to think about what syllable or chunk that might be missing. Again, I'm orally reading it out for accessibility. I might also build in their name tags. Often we have this up for our attendance or a question of the day where students can find their names and try to determine how many syllables or chunks or beads they have in their names and place it accordingly. Again, a quick routine to get our day going in the morning, connected to the explorations we have in identity. It's not they aren't the primary focus of my lesson example when exploring identity, but it offers that opportunity to use aspects of that exploration to infuse that skill building around that phonological awareness piece. Quick routines to build throughout the day without being the only focal point, allowing that space for the skill and content development alongside competency development. And then this last slide here is really just around if you wanted to extend it up into the older primary grades where we're starting to focus more on writing, bringing attention to the one vowel per sound for syllable chunk, we might focus on some spelling patterns as we chunk some of these words together, just other different extensions that could be built into existing routines. This is where, yeah, exactly, perfect.
Okay, so I'm just wondering though, maybe Leyton, you can give us some advice. Should we have another little chunk to go? Should we skip this pause and reflect and do a little bit more time on the chunk? Because it'll give us about 8 minutes, I think, if we stop for the last chunk. Or would you like us just to keep going and do a little chunk at the end?
What an incredible opportunity to type something into the chat box related to one of these questions. Look at us adapting our teaching on the spot, everybody. It's primary. This is how we roll.
Right.
So we invite you just now to take a look at these two fantastic questions that Harpreet and Charmaine. Thank you, colleagues, for sharing your work. I know we as teachers, we're not really big fans. Talking to large groups of folks, but when we share our practice, we really open up possibilities for each other. So I'm thinking a little bit about what Charmaine and Harpreet have shared. Does something really kind of connect to your thinking and practice, or how is that moving you forward slightly? Warm up those fingers, offer some pedagogical love in the chat box, and just talk a little bit about where you might go deeper or what this affirms for you, or, you know, something you're like, oh yeah, I used to do that. I might need to do a little bit of that again. And you can type at your own pace. Think of it as drops of rain, all dropping at this different times. I'll sing the eurythmics too if you'd like at the same time. I got a no from Angela. Thanks, Dixie. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Allison. Hey, Katrina. Thanks, Donna. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Deb. Thanks, Aisha. Yeah, that little mentor text combo, Harpreet, I'm already taking that away. Thanks, Tammy. Aisha, my apologies. Thanks, Carrie. Thanks, Grace. Well, speaking of visual learners,
Yeah.
I guess we're going to switch to a new little slide set now. And thank you, team, for offering us one more provocation for helping us think about literacy in our practice.
Okay. So I'm, Harp, if it's okay with you, I'm going to close this little writing piece. Does that work? Okay, so just
You bet. Go
next
for it.
time around.
Stay tuned.
Oh, here we go. So the other piece, can I just also just bring in a piece, you know, one of the things that, and I was reading through all the notes in the chat, and I was thinking about the samples that Harp had done and sort of the embedded phonics and phonemic awareness, and thinking when you build that into the classroom routines and that focus on belonging and hearing all those voices of all the kids that Charmaine had set up, then you bring in the academic perspective and it lands on territory that can hold all of that, and just how all of those pieces just weave together. So my final little piece is that I just want to take it back to let us think a bit. We did a sort of a whole class reading piece at the beginning after the mental model and some of the big ideas, and then went into creating the environment and establishing that warm and welcoming place where we honor each of the students and know them well as we move forward. And then Harp took us into an academic piece and looking at that, both the belonging and starting with names, and then how much teaching can be there. And I'd like to close with bringing it back to a whole group writing piece and thinking about that again as we move to releasing responsibility for kids and dealing with that diversity in the class, and helping everybody find a place to be where they're actually applying their skills for bubble gumming out those words, matching their sounds with their letters and putting them down, and moving into more sophisticated aspects of writing. And so how we start so frequently and so easily by drawing a picture with your resource teacher or by yourself in front of your kids. Your kids are gathered on the carpet and you're saying, you know, I'm just thinking this morning I looked out my window and this is what I saw. Okay, and so you can see this very exquisite drawing that I have done and with my highly sophisticated, well-developed drawing skills. And saying, so here's what I can see. You know, there's the river is outside, and I'm going to put my river down here, and I've got some trees, and I'm going to put my trees here. And gosh, there's a tugboat in the river, and the geese are coming by just now. So I'm going to add them in. And as I'm doing this, because kids are so willing to share, they're coaching me in what I can see outside my window, right? Because they can't resist helping me out. So we co-create a picture together, and then I'm thinking about who's in front of me and what do they need to extend their ability to put their thinking down on paper beyond the picture, moving from the picture, which is their starting point. And so we start and we think, well, you know, I think there might have been a nest up here, because I know some of the kids, and I've got a Nicholas in my class who has a hard time remembering his N, because it's the, you know, this is September, it's early on, and he's still a bit scrambled on what some of those letters are as he's come out of kindergarten. And so we practice that, yes, I think it might be a Nicholas that we put down. It's the beginning of nest, and we model how we construct these words. Now, I don't fuss over every word. I fuss over the words that are teaching points for some of the kids in my class, so that they're each hearing something that's going to acknowledge what they know and extend it a bit, which is why I have the squirrel down, because though this is mid-September, I've been reading with somebody, and in the conference, we've come to a word that started with an SQU, and we had to figure out that that's squ, those S3 letters together said squish. So I'm adding in a squirrel because that's going to be important to acknowledge somebody who's at a different level of phonemic awareness and hearing the sounds and thinking of the spelling for them as they go. And then I start my writing underneath it. And I'm starting in a really simple way, because that anything that I put up on the board is a gift that you can use afterwards. And we practice. I'm actually doing this writing. It's not an interactive write. I'm talking about spaces between the words, because some of my kids are working on that. I'm talking about how I'm capitalizing an uppercase I. I love outside my window. And then I'm looking at, I forget the like, kicking the crunchy, crackling leaves, and I'm putting in crunchy, crackling, because I know there's kids who I want to extend in the description that they're doing, both orally and in their written language. And so I want to have that as a piece in here. And I can say to them, did you notice they both started with the same two letters that blend, crunchy and crackling? And I put a comma between them. Isn't that cool? That's a sophisticated thing that writers do. And then, of course, they tell me that I wrote so fast that I skipped something, so I need to put a like in there, and we call that editing. And then they head off to do theirs. And so I just wanted to close this piece this morning by thinking about how all these pieces come together when we're teaching writing, right? We started with reading. We talked a lot about oral language and routines and responsibility for kids and relationships. And we isolated into some word skills, but we apply these pieces in writing. And this is a 1-2 class. And I just invite you to think about the diversity in here. And when you're having those quick conferences with the kids, because they're all included, what is it that you say that acknowledges the child who's doing the drawing and the writing, and that extends them a little bit farther? So notice, and you're always looking at this from a strength-based piece. So when we look at the first little girl in grade 1, and I'm looking and I'm thinking, when she looks out her window, she sees an awful lot of the playground that's outside the window in the classroom, and looks at all the things that she's labeling. And notice how some of the letters go in the right direction and some of the letters don't quite yet go in the right direction, but she's labeling as she goes, and she has lots and lots of detail in there. She's put herself in the picture. She's labeled herself. She's got some birds going on in the sky. She has a tree, and she's known how to take the tree from my picture in the environmental print and put it down into hers. And then she has a little string of letters, and a little string of letters say, I was playing on the slide. And if you look closely at them, and everybody who teaches kindergarten and grade 1 has already read that, because you know that the few letters that they put down in a continuous string really gets translated out into something much bigger. I don't leave that Post-it where I'm writing down what they've done on the child's paper, because I want them to have ownership and put it in the back of the book. It's there so that we can see it. Now, this is the piece I want you again thinking about responsiveness to the child within the whole group lesson. The next little guy is also in grade 1. And notice the difference in what it is that he has under control. Okay, he has very, very fine printing, better than mine. Okay, he's got beautiful spaces between his words, and he's got everything is organized and detailed and labeled. Okay, I see a house in the window. I see a tall tree. Okay, he's beginning grade 1. It's the 15th of September. Okay? His needs are very different than the girl sample on the left. And then we also have another little guy who's in grade 1, who's brand new to Canada and seems to have a few little extra complexities to him that might not just be learning the language, but also actually being in a building and in a school, and what some of those behaviors look like. And it's all kind of muddled just now, so it's hard to tell. But he is actually quite keen, and he wants to label things. And so we find 3 things that he can label, and his language base is very different than our language base. And so he's tracing the letters. Okay, so here's one thing. We've got a tree over here. We can see the tree outside. We put down a tree, and that's his job as he comes in. And in that same class, because it's a combined class and it has that beauty of being able to keep your last year's kids and loop them forward, I'm just sharing with you one grade 2 example. And so again, because they're all sitting together and they're all there to learn with us. When I look at my window at night, I see a moon. I see raccoons in the morning. I see birds in the afternoon. I see squirrels at dinner time. I see bunnies, so many bunnies in my backyard. I see crows, black crows. And sometimes I see leaves flying in the air. I see flowers. Okay. Now, this little girl isn't the only one in grade 2 who's writing like this, but it's so poetic. And I just love her time sequence. It's so much better than what I was thinking about in my writing. But you see, when I'm looking at modeling my writing and inviting kids in to think about their story and build on their identity and bring us all together as a collective in our classroom, I need to teach explicitly to acknowledge and extend all of those kids who are in there. Now, she happens to be one of the kids that was in the SQU. Let's focus on that. And, you know, once it's been up there, she's one of those learners that, okay, I've got it, thanks. What's the next thing for me? because that's the way my mind's going. So I think about those pieces and I think about what does that look like in our classrooms, okay? And I'm going to come back to that piece of let's all be really careful when we come into our sharing our stories and building our collective responsibility to moving the literacy development forward for our kids in this province, to include everybody, but to include everybody, and I'm going to say this in adults as well, in respectful ways where we're listening to each other's stories. We're thinking about the professional decisions we make. We're thinking about the decisions we make along the way, about all those component parts that go into the making of a reader and a writer and a storyteller and a listener and a communicator and a thinker. And we do this in ways that help us think about what's necessary for kids, and we respond to them, who they are at that time in that place. It moves them forward within their learning journey, not being invited into something that isn't necessarily as geared to them as what we can do when we work together as professional, responsive teachers. We have one final piece, ignore, that we want you to do. And look at this, we're going to make it on time. And it is a pause and reflect, sparked by Leyton. Okay. So it's a one-word whip around. Can you post into the chat one word that reflects your thinking today? And that's your ticket out the door. As you're going, however, on behalf of Charmaine and Harpreet and myself, thank you, Leyton, for inviting us to share our thinking in this little bit of time that we tried to blow through. What are some of the really important things that we wanted you to think about and take forward? We feel very honored to have been asked, and we hope that you continue to have these conversations with people in your building and across the district and across the province about what really counts in primary literacy and how we use that collective wisdom to move forward to reach and teach all our kids. And thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Faye. Thank you, Harpreet. Thank you, Charmaine. I realized that what you've shared today is just a small piece of the wonderful work that you do, but you offered us such rich, holistic examples of literacy and how welcoming kids and their identities, as seeing them as literate individuals, but how important it is for us to mentor and scaffold and support kids to move forward from where they are. The recording will come out. It's taking about 10 days, folks. So it'll show up if you signed up for the series. If you didn't sign up, people, and you just snuck in, sign up now and you'll get the recording. In our second session, we'll go deeper into these ideas and pick up the idea of multimodality. And I'm super excited to head even further into this journey together.